far as Warsh goes, I did when I spoke to him. I spoke to him at a private reception, and then also asked him a question during the Comex Gold dinner that was in New York City about 8 years ago or so. And I asked him the question. I said, um, Mr. Warsh, what, and this was in the public forum, so there are about 1,000 people there. And I said, so what is the U.S. government involved in the gold market? And if it is involved, what are the purposes of those transactions? And it was very interesting, kind of danced around. He basically said, he kind of started by saying, well, it's not as much as you would expect. And by the way, the US dollar is very important to maintain strength, and the IMF does play a role in the currency markets and so forth. And it was sort of I took it as a yes. The U.S. government is involved in the gold market, and he would know, and but he did kind of try to.
Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today I have a new guest. It's Stefan Gleason. He's the president and CEO of moneymetals.com. And he was referred to me or introduced to me by JP Cortez, who runs the Sound Money Defense League. And yeah, JP said you want to talk to Stefan because he has some really interesting insights on the precious metals market, on the sound money question, and on what's going on right now in terms of yeah, the refineries and a crazy volatile market. So Stefan, welcome to the channel.
Well, it's great to be on, Mario. I've been watching your show for years, so it's great to meet you finally and talk about this very exciting market we're in right now.
Yeah, very. I mean, on the day we're speaking here, it's Friday, January 30th. The precious metals have been all over the place in the last few days. We made an all-time high in gold and silver, and now we're testing 5,000 and 100, respectively, in gold and silver. We've had President Trump nominate his pick for the chairmanship of the Federal Reserve. Maybe we could start with that because you told me just before we started that you've met Kevin Warsh. So maybe you've
Yeah,
got the
yeah.
inside scoop.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I guess that's being discussed as the catalyst for the big correction here, and the thought that he might be a little tighter. Then maybe the other options would be, I don't know about that. I mean, he's been around for a while. He's a pretty smart guy. He was actually considered in the last administration to be the chairman, and he was passed over for Powell. But I met him right around that time actually, and he goes back. He was involved in the Fed 20 years ago as well, and he was one of the architects of the quantitative easing thing that was done in 2008. So he knows all about printing money, he knows all about using the machinery of the Federal Reserve to stimulate and to counteract the business cycle and all the things that they do that is causing these distortions. So I don't I don't really expect that we're going to be seeing anything other than dovishness from this guy or the Trump Fed in general. And frankly, with the debt burdens that the economy has, I just don't see how they have any choice. And of course, the U.S. government debt situation. So it's interesting. There's a quick, sort of correction down here on the news. I think that's just, taking out some of the air out of the balloon. I mean, gosh, it's been so incredibly, almost parabolic what's been happening, especially with silver. So a little bit of a cool off is probably healthy, and that was the excuse. But as far as Warsh goes, when I spoke to him, I spoke to him at a private reception, and then also asked him a question during the Comex Gold dinner that was in New York City about 8 years ago or so. And I asked him the question. I said, Mr. Warsh, what, and this was in the public forum, so there are about 1,000 people there. And I said, so what is the U.S. government involved in the gold market? And if it is involved, what are the purposes of those transactions? And it was very interesting, kind of danced around. He kind of started by saying, well, it's not as much as you would expect. And by the way, the U.S. dollar is very important to maintain strength, and the IMF does play a role in the currency markets and so forth. And it was sort of I took it as a yes. The government is involved in the gold market, and he would know, but he did kind of try to diminish how important that was or how much that was. So I thought that was really interesting. But as far as the plan for Warsh, yeah, we're going to see a lot of inflation regardless. So it's just we'll see how this works out over the next few days. But interesting news. He's been
Yeah,
around for a while. He was thought to be the front runner.
Yeah, and I've read that apparently he wants to cut rates, but he wants to decrease the size of the balance sheet, which was
Yeah.
ballooned by starting with QE in '08 when he was in the Board of Governors. But you can say that really and still, when push comes to shove, he'll start printing because I remember Ben Bernanke being questioned by Ron Paul in Congress just after they started QE in '09, '08. And he said, "Oh, don't worry, we're gonna taper everything back. We will do just
Yeah.
$1 trillion." And here we are, and we're like at around $7 trillion still. But yeah, it's like you said, it doesn't matter who's Fed chairman. The fiat dollar is going to continue to be debased, and it's a good thing that the stackers are being rewarded for that. And
Yeah.
I have to admit, but we can't lose sight of the idea of sound money as well, I think. And maybe we could segue into that because it's not just important for the US, but for the whole of the world that we have sound money. Yeah, it's really nice for us to be able to do well with our gold and silver, but we want yeah, a system that doesn't rob everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite an immoral system. And, on the topic of the central bankers, I think it was Alan Binder who said that the last duty of a central banker is to tell the truth. So that was kind of an interesting, so this idea that we're going to shrink the balance sheet. Yeah, I mean, they need to say that, but I really doubt they will. And they've said that before. But as far as sound money goes, of course, people don't have to wait for the system to be fixed. They don't have to look for a new monetary system or the central banks to suddenly act responsibly again. But really, they can go on their own personal gold standard, and that's what people are doing. And those who've had the foresight to do that have been richly rewarded in the last 2 or 3 years and validated for what they've been saying. I'm really optimistic that the not just what's been developing in the precious metals market, but just I think there's a growing awareness out there in the public of that there's something horribly wrong with our money and that the system is broken. They may not have figured out exactly why that is yet, but they're starting to take action. And just in the last few weeks, few months, especially with the rise of silver, we've seen a huge new influx of people wanting to get physical gold and silver for themselves in a way that, maybe it's going from 1 to 2 or 2 to 3%, which is still a very small number, but I think it's really promising. But going to the policy side, Money Metals, my company, has been heavily involved in public policy at the state and federal level here in the U.S. And we are seeing more and more momentum. And you've had JP on there to talk about some of the bills and things that we're involved with through the Sound Money Defense League. But we are seeing a lot more excitement and enthusiasm at the state level, in particular among policymakers, to try to do some of the things that they can do within their states to minimize the really deleterious effects of the Federal Reserve System and what's happening at the federal level. And so that involves, policies to remove income tax from precious metals, sales tax, encouraging states to hold gold as a reserve asset, removing regulation on local dealers. There's all kinds of things that kind of discriminate and make it harder for them to do business, get them involved with the police and turning over information about their customers. So there's been reforms in that area. There's a lot more work to do. So there's many things we can go down the list. And I know JP went into detail, but we are seeing a lot more excitement at the state level. At the same time, some of the ideas that have been coming in by people who are well intentioned we think are actually quite problematic, and that involves the state governments getting involved in joint ventures in public-private partnerships with gold businesses that are trying to sort of get special recognition to compete against everyone else in some sort of payment scheme or depository scheme. So we're not in favor of that. We think that's not what people want. They don't want the government in the middle of their gold, involved with their gold, whether it be the federal government or the state government. That's the whole reason we're in this problem is government and the involvement and of course the currency situation. So putting the government back in the middle of people's gold is not what we think is a good idea. And so we're trying to encourage states to avoid these ideas. Just because it's a gold bill doesn't mean it's good. But on the whole, it's very exciting because in general, we're getting so much support for really good reforms and seeing a lot of progress there.
Yeah, would you say the role of government should be minimal and like just related to the Treasury and the mint? I mean, that's how it used to be. You'd be able
Yeah.
to take your jewelry and say, "Can you mint a coin for me?" And they do it and take 1% seigniorage, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. In the Coinage Act of 1792 and in the U.S. Constitution, the role of government was simply to be there as a way of maybe helping to standardize weights and measures. And you would bring in your gold and you could have it coined for free. You could go to a private mint, they could coin a dollar coin or a $10 coin privately. You'd have to pay a fee there. The U.S. government offered free seigniorage. Basically, they'll standardize and give you back your gold. So their role is not to monkey around with the value of the money, monkey around with paper money, and set up a national bank. Their role is simply to be maybe a party that people can go to standardize their gold that circulates privately. And so the idea that we need to run to government to run a monetary system, even if it's a gold related monetary system, makes no sense. And we just think the government should stay out and let these things happen in the private sector. And they already are. And there's plenty of services and capabilities available privately. We don't need the government to get into partnerships with gold businesses.
Yeah, and the history is interesting because prior to the Legal Tender Act, I think it was 1861 or 2 during the Civil War, there was no Legal Tender Act. And some people are
Right.
still using like Mexican silver dollars or
Yeah.
European gold coins. You just had to like, yeah, that's what it should be, a free market.
Right, right, and basically before even the U.S. Mint, and there was plenty of other, and for decades was plenty of other circulating dollars because the dollar was simply a weight of silver. A particular standardized amount of silver was known as a dollar, and the main coin at the time, I think, in circulation around the time of the founding of the U.S. was the Spanish milled dollar, which was one of the more popular, the pieces of eight. It could be broken, and so. Yeah, it's just the idea that the government gets to define what a dollar is and change what a dollar is. The dollar was simply just a certain weight of silver. And it's interesting because you mentioned legal tender. That's a really great point. I mean, it was legal tender laws were created to apply government force to try to make things money that were not money. And that was done during the Civil War when they did the greenback, which was unbacked paper money, and they tried to circulate it out. They basically, passed it into circulation, a counterfeit form of money. And because it would not be accepted because it wasn't gold, they then used government force and said, no, legal tender. This is equal under the law and shall be recognized as such. So the whole notion of legal tender is basically a creation of government force to prop up something that isn't inherently money.
Yeah, fiat currency, I guess, needs the legal tender support.
Right.
Okay, let's switch over more to like the market right now. What's
Yeah.
happening? And maybe you are you're in the middle of the action there with
Yeah.
metals. And JP also told me that you've got probably, are you building or you have the biggest depository in
Yeah.
North America, more advanced than Fort Knox?
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course, we
Well,
don't know if there's anything
it,
in Fort Knox, do we?
no, and there's a bill actually. We're working with Senator Lee in Utah, who's a U.S. Senator, and Congressman Massey on an audit the gold bill because there hasn't been a credible audit for decades. There hasn't been ever an examination or disclosure into any encumbrances that the U.S. gold reserves may have. Has it been pledged, leased, swapped? I mean, Kevin Warsh seemed to indicate that there was some activity going on the financial side with our gold reserves, whether it be the IMF or the Exchange Stabilization Fund. So there's a bill to audit the U.S. gold reserves, which is certainly needed. But and it is an example of why the government's a bad steward. The government doesn't do a good job. So the Money Metals Exchange has another affiliated business called Money Metals Depository, and we built the largest Class 3 vault in North America, other than the New York Fed, which is technically larger from what I understand. Our vault is about 9,000 square feet. It's actually four vaults, Class 3, which is the highest rating. And the Fort Knox is only 4,000 square feet. So that, we're able to say we're twice as big as Fort Knox. But more importantly, we're a private firm. We have audits. There's actual accountability. Everything is handled under a camera, dual controls, background checks, multiple layers of physical and electronic security, all kinds of technology. But we have a lot of silver, and that's very bulky. It's kind of interesting, over the years, people say, "Oh, okay, I don't want silver because it's too bulky," and I would always say, and now it's sort of kind of coming true. It's like, well, maybe you think that you have too much silver when it's $20 an ounce. How do you feel when it's 110? Like, is it too bulky still? Are you upset that you have all this stuff? But anyway, Money Metals is one of the largest online dealers and retailers in the U.S. We have over 1 million customers, and we store billions of dollars in our facility of metal. Most people in the U.S. physical market, and I'm sure your viewers know, most people want to actually take physical delivery. That's why they buy gold and silver. They want it shipped to them. They want to have it in their hands. They don't want that counterparty risk. They certainly don't want the government involved with it. But there are some people, for various reasons, whether they're in a place where it's not as safe, or they have large amounts, or that maybe they want to have more convenience when they want to sell back, they would like to store some of their gold and silver. We think everybody should have at least some in their personal possession, and so the vast majority of our customers take delivery. But the depository is a very important part of our business, growing rapidly. All parts of our business, and really the industry right now, is incredible in terms of the amount of growth and volume that we're all seeing in our market. And that's having a really, it's causing a lot of growing pains. It's causing issues in the supply chain for a lot of dealers, wholesalers, mints. They're running into liquidity issues. They're running into long lead times. The refineries, in many cases, are actually not accepting silver for refining, or they're saying it's going to be 12 weeks or 18 weeks, or we're not going to be able to pay you for 4 weeks after we've finished or received your metal. All kinds of different restrictions being put out there. And it's actually cascading down to especially the local dealers who really rely on the refineries to melt down stuff when they have too much inventory. And while there are a lot of people, new people coming in and buying, there's also a lot of people taking profits, and that's causing, particularly with silver, a massive sort of backlog, especially if it has to be refined.
Yeah, I mean, I still believe silver and gold are going to keep going higher, but I can understand people have been holding silver for so long that they might want to sell a little
Yeah.
bit, and especially if they need the funds. That's the great thing about gold and silver is that it doesn't matter what the price is, you will always find someone to buy. I know the local coin shops seem to have difficulty right now, and they might not make a price, but I think you can always find someone who's going to pay you for that. And why do
Yeah.
you think this is happening? Is it because there's not enough refineries in the US?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the biggest reasons. There's especially silver. About 60% to 65% of the world's silver refining capacity is actually in China. And meanwhile, while there aren't like big export controls, there's thought that may be coming in China, but there's already a premium on silver and domestically in China. And then, of course, if you want to have refining, a lot of folks are sending their silver to China, and so it's sucking in the silver, and then it's going to stay there because there's no financial incentive to send it back out when there's a higher premium domestically for silver. So there is a very serious refining shortfall in the U.S., particularly for silver. And in fact, some of the refineries that have refined silver, even for the last year, were not accepting any outside silver coming in, and that was really impacting the local scrap collectors around the country who were starting to have serious problems getting their stuff refined. More recently, some of the big refineries for both gold and silver also said that we're going to have to stop paying you in advance. So the way it works is like if you're a local coin shop or a scrap collector, you usually end up with a lot more metal coming in than you're actually selling. We don't have that same issue as an online dealer. We have a lot of people buying from us, so we have that release valve. But people like to sell their metals locally often, so they don't have to ship it off. They don't mind us shipping them a box, but they're not as excited about shipping it back. We still have lots of people selling to us, but it's the local businesses that kind of bear the brunt of the selling. And so they have a huge excess of metal coming in, which pressures down the bids that they're able to pay. And then when they go to their refiners or to a wholesaler and they find out we're not buying that anymore, or we're not refining that, or you have to wait 12 weeks. And by the way, if you have to wait 12 weeks, we can't pay you till the end. when they used to be able to get in advance when the metal showed up at the refinery so they could go out and buy more metal and keep the flow going. And so two of the largest refineries in the US just sent out notices this week saying, look, we're not accepting anything for 3 weeks. We're completely overwhelmed. And when we start accepting things again, we're not going to be able to give anyone any advances. And you're going to have to finance the metal yourself until the end of the refining process, which, by the way, is taking many more weeks than usual. And so that's causing a big problem for the local guys because they're not highly capitalized businesses. They rely on those advances, they rely on the quick turn to be able to keep their business model going. And so that's causing the bids to drop and drop and drop. And if you can get them to buy it at all. So it's a very interesting scenario. I mean, it's when you have this kind of flow and this growth happen so quickly in a market that has been relatively sleepy for years, it just can't be absorbed. And in my opinion, it's just starting. I mean, we're just talking about, going from 2 to 3% or 1 to 2, I don't know the numbers exactly, but it's still a very small number of people who have any exposure to gold and silver. And this market is still in the early stages. If we have a public awakening and people get into the physical market in a bigger way, I mean, we could talk, 5, 10 times multiples of volume. And there's just no way. I mean, we're already
Yeah.
at the breaking point in the industry in terms of the stresses around the volume. And some dealers and wholesalers are handling it better than others, but you can definitely see the stress across the industry right now.
Yeah, maybe if there's more growth, like you said, and interest, the new people might kind of help out the local coin shops because they would go and maybe buy more and they wouldn't have to hold as much, I guess.
Yeah, and that's what they rely. I mean, that's if the local dealer doesn't have enough people buying, then he has this flow, and he has to flip it to a wholesaler or
Yeah,
or send it to a refinery, and that's been the big issue.
yeah,
But it's not even just that; it's also just the turnaround. When you're buying metal, and we get hundreds of boxes a day from people shipping in to sell to us, and we've hired Money Metals has hired 65 people since Christmas in our operation. We need another 40 or 50, and we're desperately trying to get them hired, just to stay on top of the volume, which, we're not even trying to get more volume right now. We're just, dealing with what we have. But it's quality control. The stuff comes in. There are some fakes. You have to test everything. Everything has to be tested carefully under cameras. People sometimes ship stuff in. They didn't realize that it was what it was, or they thought it was something different. Maybe they sold you this, but it was that. So it's a very manual process when you're dealing with the public who, have stuff. They've cleaned out their safes or their drawers, and they don't know necessarily what they have. So there's a lot of, and occasionally fakes. I don't want to say that's a big issue. It's actually not that big of an issue, but we are seeing an uptick. And it's usually folks they just didn't know. It's not they're trying to defraud us or anyone. But the point is, this is a physical commodity, and it takes real quality control.
yeah.
And a responsible dealer is going to staff that and make sure that they check everything really carefully. And so that's causing backlogs all over the place.
How easy it is for people to like ship, and also how much does it cost if someone wanted to send you stuff
Yeah.
to sell?
So we recommend when people ship off gold and silver that they should use U.S. Postal Service registered mail. And the reason is because you can buy insurance through registered mail. If you send it UPS or FedEx, they don't offer insurance for gold and silver. So registered mail, there's a fee. I think they'll ship up to $50,000 of value in a box, and it'll cost you, somewhere probably 15 to $20 for the postage, and then the insurance on say 50,000 will probably cost you another 70 or $80 or something. So it's reasonable. The other thing is people need to be careful about boxing it. They got to double box anything that's heavy, fill the voids, use lots of tape. The post office wants you to use that paper tape and not plastic tape to seal all the seams. So we have a little instructional thing that we send out saying, here's how to pack the box properly. Most people do fine, but the insurance is important. And so USPS registered mail is the way people do it. And that's why some people like to go, most people, I would say, like to go locally so they don't have to ship it off. But the problem is they tend to get paid less if they're offered a bid at all in this environment,
Yeah,
as for the reasons we
yeah.
talked about.
And in terms of like if I were to keep some of my gold with you, would I also be able to have it like delivered to me? Do you do
Yeah.
that as well?
Yeah, so we have segregated storage, and the way that works is, the metal that you purchase or that you ship in is held in your own physical container that's, sealed with a tag number and RFID and all that stuff, and it's tracked and audited anytime the container is open, it's re-audited under camera, two people are involved. Everything is really accountable that way. We do internal audits, we have external audits, but it's segregated and it's your property. It's not on our balance sheet. It's your property simply in our care, just like a safe deposit box at a bank. And so you have the right to take delivery of it at any time. We can ship it off to you, or you could sell it back to us, or you could sell it to someone else. You could sell it to one of our competitors and we'll ship it to them. So it's very user friendly that way. And it's frankly, it's a lot of manual work on our end, but it's very easy for the customer just on the website. They can click around a few times and boom, it's sold. The instructions are given, or they can call. A lot happens in the background, but yeah, it's pretty slick.
Yeah, and I think you've been around since what, 2010, right?
2010, yep. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah,
Another thing that's
yeah,
interesting, Mario, is, and this is something that we're doing that's really not available in the market, and that is we also will lend somebody, give them a line of credit against their gold, just like a home equity loan. So you have these valuable assets that sometimes most people think the only way you can get liquidity from your gold and silver is to sell it, and that's certainly what most people will do, and that's a good option. But one of the things is when you sell your gold and silver, you have now possibly created a capital gains tax event. And so there is a scenario if for a business purpose, because we're not a consumer lender, but if you're a small business person or have a big investment thing going on, a real estate investor, that kind of thing, we can actually provide people a line of credit, just like a home equity line, that's flexible, secured by their own physical gold or silver in our depository. And so we're seeing a lot of interest in that these days because people, for one, they're sitting on more equity, in their metals, and two, they may be concerned about selling it or they don't want to sell it and incur a capital gains tax obligation. So there's been some interest there. It's not a huge part of what we do,
yeah.
but it's a nice accommodation, and it's definitely not for everybody. And again, it does need to be for business purposes because we're not a consumer lender.
Yeah, and I would also emphasize to the viewers because they might be thinking, "Oh, what if I don't want my gold lent?" But
Yeah,
you specifically tell
yeah.
Stefan that you want to lend your gold. He won't lend someone else's gold to someone else.
Yeah, and to be clear, we do not lend gold in any way. What we're talking about is somebody wanting to borrow cash against their own
Yeah.
gold, and
Oh,
that's
yes,
that's
that's
what we,
right. Yeah, that's right.
there
It's
are there are
like
firms that lend gold as a
a
service, but that's not
pawnbroker,
what we
right?
do.
You,
Like a pawnbroker, except that not at those kinds of interest rates.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, it's
Can you tell us what kind of rates you charge for a line
our
of
rate
credit?
is in the 9% range,
Okay.
annualized. Right
Okay.
now, it's based on the prime rate. It's a margin over the prime or
Yeah.
above or below. So it's not as quite as low as you would get for a home equity line of credit where you borrow against your house, but no bank will lend against your gold. I mean, that's the thing. This is really not available except through money metals in the U.S. market. It's big in India. That's very
Yeah.
common for banks to lend against people's own property if they want to get a loan against even their jewelry. But no bank will give you a loan in the US unless you're in a high net worth family wealth type scenario. No bank, they don't know how to store it. They don't know how to verify it. They don't know how to hold it. They don't know how to liquidate it.
Yeah.
In fact, they think it's like kryptonite. It's
Yeah. India's going to start doing it with silver as well, aren't they, this year
yeah,
in April?
yeah.
Yeah. You already do it.
We already do. It's good collateral, and it's strictly if that person wants to borrow against their own gold and silver, and it's in their own segregated account in our depository, and they're offering it as collateral for a loan for themselves, we can do
Yeah.
that.
Okay, great. Um, what else is going on? I mean, aside from what do you think of the current market action? It just got a bit overdone.
Yeah.
It was just a correction.
Well, you've had Michael Oliver on your show. I really think that he's onto something with the whole notion about silver moving into a new reality. I think he's right. I think he's been proven right so far. Hasn't reached the levels he's talking about, but I could see that happening. I think there's clearly a shift. And both in psychology and just in demand trends, and it's feeding on itself. And what we're seeing in silver is clearly being driven by market tightness. I mean, we're heavily involved in the U.S. physical market. We're involved in taking deliveries off the exchange. We know what's happening in the U.S. market. We've seen the premiums in London. We've seen the premiums in Asia. We were actually dealing, there are some folks in Dubai and India who were screaming, pounding the table, needing silver. And we were shipping pallets of silver to India because they were such a high premium that it made financial sense for them and us to do a transaction. So there's clearly a lot of demand happening, and especially outside of the US. And it's that you see that in the premiums. And so I think that, getting through the $50 level, I think that, silver's been kind of behind all the other metals and it's playing catch up. And I think he's right
Yeah,
about what he's saying,
I,
and
yeah,
we'll see. But it's been a credible ride so far.
I agree. And the other thing is, the more valuable silver becomes, the more of monetary aspect it gets, because I've been
Yeah.
hearing that even central banks now and sovereign wealth funds are starting to buy silver because it's not as bulky anymore. You
Yeah.
know, it
Silver always plays catch up in a bull market.
yeah,
You mentioned the higher value attracting more interest. There's even an economic principle, or I guess it's a circumstance. It's called a Giffen good. And so silver, I think, is acting like a Giffen good, and in the sense that it's the perceived inferior good, with gold being the superior, silver being the inferior, and people are switching to it. And as the price rises, it rises more quickly than gold, and then it rises even more as it rises because people continue switching to it. So, and one of the classic examples is the potato famine in Ireland, where meat became so expensive, people switched to potatoes. Potatoes started going up. The more the potatoes went up, the more people wanted potatoes. And so it's this, the law of demand is actually counteracted or broken in this scenario of a Giffen good, where higher prices actually results in more demand and not less. And we're seeing it not just from an investment standpoint between gold and silver, but you're also seeing it in the context of, concerns around supply, where people are saying, we need to have more silver on hand for our manufacturing purposes. We're seeing what's happening. There's real tightness. And so the shortages beget more shortages, and people start having, instead of 3 weeks of supply, might have 3 months of supply on the shelf because they're not going to stop their manufacturing process over silver, which is a small component, one of the small inputs. So I think there's just a lot happening in the physical market. This is very much a demand driven situation. And then you run that up against the supply situation, which is also highly inelastic. And the fact that so much of silver is a byproduct does, $100, $200 silver doesn't necessarily result in much more or any more silver supply coming out of zinc and copper mines. And it's such a hard business already in mining, such a long lead time. And then you add the fact that there's almost no primary silver mines, 30% of them. So there's just a very interesting combination. We've been talking about these, you've been talking about these factors for years, and it never seemed to matter. It's like,
yeah.
wow, this is
Now,
just an explosive situation.
now
And now it's
finally,
happening.
yeah, finally is happening, and people who don't understand what has been happening and what's happening now, they keep trying to call tops, and I think they're going to be
Yeah.
wrong. Anyway, Stefan, I really enjoyed speaking with you, and we should do it again in the near future. And thank you for coming on my
Yeah.
channel.
My pleasure. Great to be here. Thanks, Mario.
You're welcome.